Imagine this. You're a writer. You specialize in hard-boiled detective novels. And no, we're not talking about Raymond Chandler today. The characters you create are tough as nails, fiercely independent, they have their code, and they're damn good at their jobs. You've built a solid reputation in the New York scene, with cops and old clients often sending new business your way. Then one night, the phone rings. A voice on the other end blurts out, "Is this Paul Auster, the detective?" Now, your name is Daniel Quinn. As far as you know, it's been your name since the day you were born. But as if by some strange impulse, after getting the same call for Paul Auster 3 nights in a row, you answer, "Yes, this is he." And just like that, you've stepped right into the pages of your own fiction, into a New York City made of glass and steel, and into a vast labyrinth of identity. This is the opening of City of Glass, the masterpiece by the American postmodern master Paul Auster. As for what that word postmodern actually means, and where it came from, well, we can save that for another day. Today, we're putting this story side by side with one from France. The French author is Patrick Modiano. An even bigger name, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2014. His book is most often translated as Rue des Boutiques, Obscures, The Street of Dark Shops, but I much prefer its other English title, Missing Person. You see that name? Missing Person? It gets straight to the heart of the story. These 2 novels are like 2 brothers. One is set in the bustling metropolis of America, the other on the misty streets of Europe, but both are playing the same dangerous game, the search for me. First, let's talk about how these 2 brothers are alike. At the core of both stories is a detective with a displaced identity. In City of Glass, the writer Quinn is hired by a strange, wealthy couple and decides to go along with the mix-up, posing as the detective Paul Auster to investigate a case. Of course, the fact that the client was offering a generous fee from the get-go was a major factor, which is perfectly understandable. Quinn had his own life, but as he starts playing the part of someone else, his original identity begins to dissolve, like a drop of ink in a glass of water, slowly fading away. Meanwhile, in Missing Person, the protagonist, Guy Rowland, is a detective who is literally an amnesiac. His entire past is a blank slate. His boss is retiring and leaving the detective agency to him, so he takes on his final case, which is also his first, to find out who I am. You see how fascinating this is? A detective's job is to uncover other people's secrets, but their own biggest secret is themselves. They are both hollow men. Even before taking on their cases, they had moments of dissociation, feeling like they were someone else. Quinn, for example, often imagined himself as the characters from his own novels. They are like empty vessels, waiting for something to come along and fill them. Neither of these is a detective story in the traditional sense. Don't expect a killer to be caught and the case to be solved in the end. No, the case here is a philosophical one, a profound inquiry into the question, who am I? If you're enjoying this story, creating this isn't easy, so I hope you'll hit that like and subscribe button. Now, I'll get right back to telling you how these 2 muddled detectives go about finding themselves. You see, their starting points are incredibly similar. Both begin with an uncertain self and set off on a journey of discovery. They're each holding a map, but on that map, where the destination should be, there isn't a place. There's just a giant question mark. Alright, now that we have these questions in mind, let's continue and dig a bit deeper. Although they start in a similar place, the methods these 2 detectives use to find themselves, and the fates they ultimately meet, are worlds apart. One turns left, the other turns right, and they walk towards completely different destinies. Let's start with our American, Quinn. His search in City of Glass is a cerebral, semiotic adventure, a real mind-bender, you could say. He stalks a crazed old scholar through the streets of New York, a man who believes that language was corrupted after the fall of the Tower of Babel, and wants to invent a new one where words and things correspond perfectly once more. So, what does Quinn do? He follows this line of thought. He maps the suspect's movements and discovers that the points on the map, when connected, spell out letters, Tower of Babel. You see what a postmodern scene this is. He isn't looking for evidence, he's searching for meaning, deciphering signs. But the deeper he ventures into this labyrinth of language and symbols, the more lost he becomes. His own language, his own identity, begins to crumble. In the end, he spends all his money and ends up like a homeless man, watching over an alleyway. He is no longer Quinn the writer, nor is he Auster the detective. He is nothing. He becomes a pure observer, a transparent man who completely disappears into the city of glass. What Auster shows us is an implosion of the self, how a person, through pure logic and speculation, can think himself into non-existence. Now, let's cut to the misty streets of Paris and take a look at our Frenchman, Roland. His search has a completely different feel. He doesn't play those abstract symbol games. His method is sensory, gentle, and even a little melancholic. What does he rely on? Faded old photographs, dusty address books, a small wanted ad in a newspaper, and the fragmented memories of people who might still remember him. His entire process is like assembling a giant jigsaw puzzle. Many of the pieces are lost forever, but he doesn't care. He patiently puts together the pieces he can find. He might find a name he once used, a photo of himself with a beautiful woman, a hint of his life in hiding during World War II. Does he ultimately find a possible version of himself? He does. But, is it important? It seems not to be. What Modiano is trying to say is that a complete, definite, unchanging self may not exist at all. Our identity is constructed from these fragments of memory, the impressions of others, and the traces of history. Roland's search isn't an implosion, it's a gentle reconstruction. He doesn't disappear. Instead, through the very act of searching, he builds a new identity for himself, the identity of a missing person in search of himself. And this is where we have to dig a little deeper, to the most crucial part of our story today. Why did these two literary masters, Auster and Modiano, go to such great lengths to write about two detectives who have lost themselves? Behind it all lies a very profound philosophical idea, one we can sum up with a quote from the existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre: "Existence precedes essence." What does that mean? Let's use a simple analogy. When you make a pair of scissors, you first have an idea of what it's for. It needs to be able to cut things, that's its essence, and then you create it, that's its existence. So for scissors, essence precedes existence. But for humans, Sartre said, it's the other way around. Humans are first thrown into the world, existence, and then, through their choices and actions, they define who they are, they create their essence. You aren't born a hero or a coward, it's your every choice that makes you one. You surely understand this feeling. Maybe you wanted to be a scientist as a kid, grew up to be a programmer, and in the future, you might want to open a cafe. Your essence is always changing, right? Now let's look back at our two detectives. You could say their authors forced them into the ultimate testing ground for existence precedes essence. They were stripped of their pasts, their identities, their memories, that is. They were stripped of all predefined essence. They became blank slates, returned to a state of pure existence. This is both absolute freedom and absolute terror. So, here's my take. I believe these two books explore the two possibilities of self-creation in this state of an identity vacuum. Auster's City of Glass is a cautionary tale. It shows the danger of this freedom. Quinn had complete liberty to redefine himself, but he failed. He got lost in deciphering the signs of the external world and forgot to build himself from within. If, at the beginning of this mysterious commission, he still had the chance to actively and consciously search for his true self, he made no effective choices or actions during the process to create a new Quinn. In the end, faced with infinite possibilities, he was crushed and chose complete nihilism. Auster tells us that when a person loses all the social and historical coordinates that ground him, he may completely collapse under the unbearable weight of that freedom. Modiano's missing person, on the other hand, offers a more humane answer. Roland also faces a blank slate, but he doesn't look outward for a grand philosophical solution. He looks inward, to the past, to salvage those fragments of memory, each one a tiny, shimmering piece that might reflect his true former self. He knows he can never recover a complete past, but through the act of searching itself, he achieves self-creation. His new identity is built on the act of being the man who searches for his past. What's important is the process. A person's life is like a journey. Even if we all arrive at the same final destination, the meaning of life will be vastly different, because the process and its content are different. His essence is the search itself. Modiano gently tells us that, even if we lose our past, even if history is in ruins, we can still give meaning and identity to our present selves by engaging with those ruins, by cherishing and piecing together the fragments. It's a more resilient and more poetic way of being. So, folks, the two stories we've talked about today may look like detective novels on the surface, but they are actually philosophical fables about the predicament of modern life. They both begin with the question, who am I? But Auster's answer is chilling. If you keep asking, you might find that the you you're looking for doesn't exist at all, and you'll shatter into a million pieces. Modiano's answer, however, is warm. Don't be afraid. Even if you've forgotten who you are, just start searching. Along the way, you will meet yourself anew. And finally, I'd like to leave you all with this question. If one day you woke up as a blank slate, would you choose to be Quinn, spiraling into nothingness in your quest for meaning? Or would you choose to be Roland, patiently gathering fragments of memory in the mist to piece together a new self? That's an answer, I'm afraid, that only you can give. All right, folks, when we opened that conversation, we put the stories of these two muddled detectives on the table. One thought himself into non-existence, and the other found himself through searching. I asked you at the end, what would you choose? I know, it's not an easy question. In fact, it's not a simple choice between two options at all. Behind it lies a bigger question, one that none of us in the modern world can escape. Why is it getting easier and easier for us to lose ourselves? Think about it. In the past, a person's identity was so easy to define. If you were a blacksmith's son, you'd most likely become a blacksmith. The city you were born in, its culture and customs, were etched into your very bones. Your identity was like a block of iron, already forged and solidified by the great hammer of society. But what about now? Sociologists call our current era liquid modernity. Just listen to that term liquid. It's so descriptive. It means that everything around us, our relationships, our jobs, even our values, has become like water, unstable, constantly flowing, and ever-changing. One day you're working in finance in London, the next you might be off to Thailand to open a guest house. One morning you're sharing Zen life on Instagram, and by the afternoon you're fighting tooth and nail over a project contract. You know this for a fact. We all carry several identities. We're one person at the office, another at home, and someone else entirely online. We're no longer that solid block of iron. We've all become liquid people. Now when you look back at those two detectives, don't they suddenly feel much more familiar? Their stories are, in fact, two extreme reflections of us liquid people searching for an identity in this liquid society. Paul Auster's City of Glass is a thoroughly liquid world. The streets of New York, the glass curtain walls, the cold relationships between people, everything is hard and transparent, yet lacks warmth. The writer, Quinn, is a typical liquid person. When he gets the chance to become the detective Auster, he flows into that new identity without hesitation. Why? Because his own original identity was too thin, and he longed to grasp onto something more solid, more interesting. But he made one crucial mistake. He was searching for a solid answer in a liquid world. He wanted to find that single, absolute meaning that could explain everything, that divine language that could make words and things correspond perfectly again. And what was the result? It's like trying to catch the moon's reflection in the water with your bare hands. The harder you try, the more turbulent the water becomes, until even the reflection shatters. His eventual disappearance is the inevitable tragedy of a liquid person trying to fight against a liquid world. He evaporated. But Modiano's missing person is more insightful. He shows us liquid people, a way forward. His protagonist, Roland, starts out in the purest liquid state amnesia, with nothing. But he doesn't fight against this liquidity. He accepts the fact that he is liquid. So what does he do? He begins to permeate. Like water, he flows into the cracks of the past, soaking up the essence of old photos, old addresses, and old memories. He isn't trying to reforge a block of iron. He's just trying to see what has dissolved in his own pool of water. The identity he eventually finds, that of Pedro McAvoy, Is it important? Not really. It's just the biggest fragment he managed to salvage. What's truly important is that in the process of salvaging, his own murky water slowly settled and became clear. He saw himself for who he was in the present, a searcher. He didn't try to freeze into a solid block of ice. Instead, he learned how to maintain his form while in motion. He embraced the liquid nature of his identity. So, the new perspective I want to share today is this. These two books, especially Missing Person, are actually teaching us a kind of wisdom for liquid survival. Our generation may never have the kind of stable, solid, lifelong identity that our ancestors did. Feeling lost, confused, and occasionally like an outsider will be our normal state. But the key is how we view this liquidity. Do we, like Quinn, feel terrified because we can't find a solid piece of driftwood and ultimately drown in the sea of infinite possibilities? Or do we, like Roland, simply accept that we are swimming in an ocean of memory, and that the meaning of our existence lies not in reaching some distant shore called ultimate identity, but in the act of swimming itself? Every time we remember the past, every time we make a choice, every time we tell our story, we are defining the boundaries and the composition of our own pool of water. So, folks, the question of, who am I, for us modern people, may no longer have a noun for an answer. It's not a destination anymore, but a verb, a process. We are not a result. We are the search itself. This is perhaps the ultimate secret that these two literary masters, from opposite sides of the Atlantic, were both trying to tell us about how to be a muddled soul in the world today. If you've been interested enough to listen or read this far, you must be someone who loves to think, haha. In that case, let's get a refill on that coffee and dive even deeper into this topic. We've been talking for a while now, from New York's City of Glass to Paris's Street of Dark Shops, from existence precedes essence to liquid modernity. We've reached a conclusion. We modern people are all liquid people with fluid identities. Paul Auster gave us a warning sign, telling us not to mess around too much, or we might lose ourselves completely. Modiano, on the other hand, handed us a paddle, saying, "Don't be afraid. Learn how to use this, and you can still move forward in this liquid world." Alright, so that raises the question, if we are all liquid, how did Modiano's protagonist, Roland, manage to hold himself together and not evaporate like Auster's Quinn? That paddle of his, the one called Searching, what exactly is it made of? Today, we're going to uncover this final layer of the mystery. The name of that paddle is story, or to put it another way, narrative. There's a school of thought in psychology called narrative psychology. Its core idea is very simple. Humans are, by nature, storytelling animals. We understand the world and ourselves not through cold logic and data, but through the stories we weave for ourselves. Why are you you? It's not because of your ID number, it's because you have a unique, continuously updated oral history of you playing out in your mind. Now, when you look at those two detectives again, everything clicks into place. Quinn's ultimate tragedy was, in essence, a complete failure of narrative. Don't forget, what was his profession at the start? A writer, someone who made a living by telling stories. The irony is staggering. When he had the chance to write a new script for his own life, he abandoned his greatest weapon. He lost faith in the power of story and instead became obsessed with an external, objective, singular truth, that divine language that could explain the entire universe. He handed over the power to define himself to external signs and clues, and the result? When the external world failed to give him a definitive answer, his own story came to a halt. A person who cannot tell their own story is a person who has lost their self. That's why he had to disappear. He became an author who stopped writing, an abandoned character. And Roland? He did the exact opposite. He accomplished a magnificent act of narrative self-rescue. What did he have? A pile of disconnected fragments, a few photos with blurry faces, a couple of names that sounded like aliases. Was any of this the truth? Not at all. But Roland did something remarkable. He took these fragments and strung them together with the thread of his search, weaving a story that was broken, yet beautiful. The title of this story could be How an amnesiac man searched for his past. In this story, he was both the author and the protagonist. Every clue he found was another chapter written for his novel. In the end, did he find the 100% real Pedro McAvoy? It no longer mattered. What mattered was that by telling the story of his search, he successfully created a vessel for his liquid self. That vessel is his self. His story was his to explore, his to continue writing. Thinking about it now, I still remember the jolt I felt the third time I read Missing Person. Brilliant. Truly, just brilliant. At this point, you can surely understand that this is exactly what each of us does every single day. When you complain to your friends about your boss, you're telling a story of suffering in the workplace. When you post a carefully edited travel photo, you're telling a story of poetry and distant lands. And when you introduce yourself to someone you're interested in, you're telling a meticulously curated story of who I am. It is through these continuous narratives that we affirm our existence and fight against the uncertainty and anxiety that come with living in a liquid world. We are all the novelists of our own lives. Of course, we must also admit that the path Roland chose is tinged with sorrow. A misty, lingering melancholy permeates every one of Modiano's books. Why? Because when you accept that your identity is a constantly evolving story, you also accept that nothing is permanent or certain. Your story is built upon memories that could be forgotten at any moment, built upon the people and events that are now gone, like ghosts. This melancholy isn't a sickness, it's a form of clarity. It's the gentle sadness that comes after accepting the fundamental impermanence of life. So, folks, the book talk we've had today, we've pretty much covered it all. From Auster to Modiano, from New York to Paris, they were both, in fact, answering the same question. In a world that makes it increasingly difficult to see ourselves clearly, how should a person live? Auster's answer is brutal. He pulls back the curtain to show you that there might be nothing but emptiness behind it. Modiano's answer is compassionate. He hands you a pen and says, "Don't be afraid. The script may be lost, but the pen is still in your hand. You get to decide how the next chapter of your life story is written." This, perhaps, is the greatest gift literature can give us. It doesn't give you the answers, but it allows you to see the questions clearly, and then it places the pen that can write those answers right back into your hand. All right, that's all for today's story. I'm in London today, and the night is beautiful. Thank you for watching or listening. I wish you happiness every day, and we'll see you next time.